Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Krista Berry, the new director of the Old Stonehouse Museum. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really great having you. I've had on at least 3 or 4 different directors over the last 15 years of the Old Stonehouse.
Yeah, one of the fun things that we were recently talking about is with very few exception, if any, I think all of the executive directors of the Old Stonehouse are still local. So that's kind of a cool longevity for the institution.
Right. And even though you've lived away, you're a homegrown woman.
Yep. So I born and raised in Derby. I actually grew up in an old one-room schoolhouse, Blake School,
Right.
as you probably know about. So I lived just 10 minutes down the road from the Old Stonehouse, and it is quite an interesting life journey to see myself end up being the director of it now after, growing up just down the road.
So how did that all happen?
Oh gosh, to offer the cliff notes, I guess, because that story could get long. When I was 17, I went to Chicago to go to art school because I wanted to be a graphic designer, and college was very hard to afford, and so I ended up having to drop out probably 3 semesters in, and then I spent some years, working, and I actually had moved back to Vermont for a stint, I think 3-4 years in my early 20s. And then when I was, I think it must have been 24, I was able to go back to college finally and went to Beloit College in Wisconsin for anthropology. And they have 2 museums on campus. And so I very quickly started working in both of those museums and learning about museums and had to figure that this was my direction. And then from there, I worked in a few different museums in Wisconsin and Illinois. I also did archaeological field work in Illinois, in the Virgin Islands. And then I ended up in Colorado as at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I spent a year rehousing the archaeology collection. That was very cool. Then I ended up as the executive director of the Lafayette History Museum, and through a lot of personal decisions, the decision to come home finally a couple years ago. And I didn't know if I was actually ever going to get to work in a museum again when I made that decision.
And how did you hear about this opening?
Totally serendipitous. I had been working actually at the hospital for a year, and I just one day was like, let's check Indeed. Let's just kind of see what's out there.
Yeah.
And there was a listing for Director of Development and Communication at the Old Stonehouse, which was very in my wheelhouse. And so I applied and was hired. And yeah, it was very serendipitous, actually. It was really kind of funny how it worked out like that.
One of your late grandmother, your mother's mother, she seemed to had a love for history too, at least local history, because she would call me up, being a history writer, she'd call me up, and if she read something, she'd call up and add to it. And she always liked talking local history. I don't know, did you ever talk local history to her?
Oh yeah, no, I spent tons of time with my grandmother, Esther Lamont. She this month would have been her 101st birthday coming up. She was born in 1924, and she grew up just down the road from the Blake School on Salem Derby Road.
Right.
And it's kind of funny. She had a plate with the Old Stonehouse on it that used to sit on her counter, and I always really enjoyed the plate. And I actually just recently was given one of these plates, and I almost cried. It was so nice. But yeah, Graham, she was probably one of the main people in my family that shared my interest in history too. We both really loved history, and so she would be the one most often to tell me about local stuff. And like you said, she would always have interesting things to add, and she followed you very closely too. She had a scrapbook with every issue of the Northland Journal. I wish I had gotten those scrapbooks because she collected them, and Yeah, quite a few things. She had a few of your books as well, and a few other local history books that I inherited from her.
When I began writing history, I was about your age, and it was actually working for the Chronicle. Yeah, I'm probably a little bit older than you, but I was interested because everybody was amazed, like, you're that young and you like history? Because, I hate to say it, a lot of times people don't develop a love for history until later on.
Yeah.
And I think there's less women, but it seems like there's more women coming out of the woodworks and enjoying history. But do you run into many people who are surprised at your age that you like history?
Oh, my whole life, yeah, for sure. I have very often, really until very recently, usually I'm the youngest person in a room in my entire career, which is fine. That has never bothered me. But I definitely have had a lot of people find my interest in history surprising. When that came up the most, I was at the American Association of Anthropology AAA conference,
Right.
and they had a seminar there on death and dying.
Right.
And I've always had a preoccupation as well with death and dying, which I think is partially also feeds into my interest in history and the past. And I was the youngest person in that room, and I remember walking in, and I had several, anthropologists kind of turn around and look at me and go, do you know where you are? Like, are you in the right place? And I was like, yes, this is where I wanted to be. So,
Well,
yeah.
I have a 9-year-old grandson, and because I divide my time between Derby, Vermont, and Marquette, Michigan, and he lives there, and he devours all things history of that community.
Yeah.
We go on history tours I'm usually, even at 60, I'm one of the younger people. And then here he is, 9 years old, and little do they know that he isn't just tagging along. He's taking it all in. He's repeating it. And but that gets me on, before we get back to the old stone house, I have noticed do you think, I think of all the great history people, and I don't mean like historians, I mean just people who just loved history. Like I think of of course Bob at the Old Stone House would know people like Chet Carpenter, Emily Nelson. They were just, that history was them. Mm-hmm. Do you think your generation is picking up the ball or not? Because even my generation, I look around and I don't see a lot of my generation compared to the previous generation. What are you seeing?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I feel like I could give you a thesis of an answer. And one point I wanted to kind of make that I don't want to forget to make too is it's interesting because I think in some ways we do ourselves a disservice in passing the interest of history along through school. Because I think the way we teach history in school is taught so poorly. As somebody who, it was my favorite subject. I love history, and I love deep history. Like, my favorite time period is 40,000 years ago, and prehistory is my jam. And I did not enjoy the history classes that I had in school until college, when you could actually get into really social construct talk about why history happens and not just how it happened. And in history classes, you go to junior high, high school, elementary, it's so taught like this battle was this date, and then this treaty was signed at that date. And my brain does not retain names and dates well, and I don't really care that much about wars. I am so much more interested in the border period around wars because of what came and then what happened after. The catalyst that war is for change, I find so much more interesting than the specifics of the war itself. And that's so often what we get stuck teaching. And I also feel like I learned the Revolutionary War 5 years and never got to World War II. So I just really feel like as a society, we could do a lot better in making history more interesting.
Absolutely. And it's like I'm often dumbfounded when I haven't actually spoken in a school since before COVID, and I've been utterly astounded by the number of people, history teachers, I don't think I found one who even, I don't know if, have you heard of, like we had this really great history story. It's a tragedy that we could learn so much from. Space research and Gerald Bull at up in Jay and Highwater, and it should be taught in our schools because you had this aerospace place that then transformed into this place where they retrofitted weaponry for war and made weapons, and then the CIA got involved, and Gerald Bull ended up being, I think, railroaded for shipping arms to South Africa when it was really a CIA operation, and then he ended up being assassinated by supposedly the Mossad over in Belgium. And that, to me, as a local person, I've been utterly astonished that that's story, because I think if you can make history local, then you can branch your way out. And if you know a kid is interested in hockey, okay, do a piece on Charles Adams. Charles Adams, the founder of the Boston Bruins, was born in Newport Center.
Right.
And so bring it local and then work your way out. Make it interesting.
Yeah, and and I think that local element too is so key for a place like this, because I know even in myself growing up here, I felt so isolated, and you just feel so disconnected. And then having come back, I am endlessly fascinated and surprised at just how interconnected we are, and the types of people that live in our community, the connections that are made to individuals here to all of the other places in the world are
absolutely
so under wraps,
And then just think, because we're in a small community, I knew who your mother was. I knew who two of your grandmothers was and are. And
especially my family. I can't go anywhere.
So, I could sit here all day with you, because I think we have some of the same philosophy, even though I'm not, my interest in history doesn't go as far back as yours, because I like to be able to talk to my history, as in, not always, I do research too, but a lot of times what I do with my writing is I will interview a person like in their 90s, and then I'll find some key components of it, and then research whether it be the Great Depression or women's rights or whatever, and so do the oral history and then work around it. But then some of the things about history, sometimes people get all stuck on the big stories, but then there's so many little stories I think need to be preserved as well. I've even done stories from the outhouse. So I remember one day being at the Old Stone House, and I said, if you're going to keep this, if you're going to make this historical, I said, because I noticed, I looked over and saw a box of toilet paper. And I said to him, no, corn cobs. Yeah, because that's what at one period of history they used corn. So I wanted to see staff there using corn cobs.
Farmers' almanacs. We should just be going through the stats, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and, no, it's been great dealing with you guys, because Peggy Day Gibson and the moving of the what was the building?
The grammar school.
Yeah.
Orleans County Grammar School.
Yeah, the moving of that, or with Molly Vasey, who is still at the Old Stone House, and she brought it forward in its own way with new programming, and now I'm looking forward to see what you do with it. And you're taking over during a big milestone.
I am, yeah. It's and I'm so pleased to still have Molly as part of the team at Old Stone House. She's now special projects manager, which is a very good role for her, because she has so much long institutional knowledge at this point, having an 8-year run as the executive director.
Has she been there that long?
Yeah, I think coming on 8 years was her full run as ED. And so now just trying to find a way to still be at the Old Stone House, but in a way that meets the needs of her personal life a little bit better. So I'm really optimistic about her new role, and especially still having her as such a close resource is so important to me as well, because I do feel the weight of her shoes to be filled, so to speak. I'm excited. So 2025 is our 100-year anniversary of being a museum. So the Old Stone House, of course, was built in 1834 to 1836 by Alexander Twilight, and it served first as a dormitory. Later, his wife used it as a boarding house after Alexander had passed away. It was then owned, in private hands for a stretch of time, and then around 1916, it was purchased by the Orleans County Historical Society, saved from demolition, which is always such an interesting part of the story of the house too, that I don't think a lot of people realize. It was built kind of against the wishes of the town trustees. So Alexander Twilight went ahead and was like, nope, I'm building this thing with or without your blessing. And so when it came kind of, years past, the town wasn't really that attached to it. There were some people who might have still been even a little irked by its presence. And so there were other people who had their eyes on it as construction materials,
right,
to build the railroads, which was the reason that, people were kind of moving out of Brownington downtown, being a stagecoach location.
Right.
Now the stagecoach isn't the main transportation. We're moving on to railroads, and they want to tear down the Old Stone House to build the very railroads, moving people out of Brownington.
Right.
What an interesting course of events. So the Stone House gets saved, and then in 1925 they open it as a museum. So this is our 100 years as a museum, but certainly not only 100 years of the Old Stone House. It's obviously much older too.
It's interesting. I hadn't heard the story how they wanted to tear it down, and that it wasn't put up with everybody's best wishes. That's the story. A similar story is when they built St. Mary's Church here, that it didn't get the entire blessings of the Catholic the hierarchy.
I didn't know that.
And they haven't threatened to tear it down. Like, don't go over there today and expect to see St. Mary's being torn down.
Yeah.
But as the story goes, I think it was the priest at the time made some command decisions about the church, and that's how we ended up with that big beautiful church there, because command decisions were made locally, I understand.
It is interesting, especially in a town of this size, communities of this size, how much one person's individual will can really make a lasting impact on the landscape. It's so much more potential to do things here than in Chicago or Denver or larger cities.
And I think it was probably easier back then, like with zoning regulations now and so on. But I do agree with you. So what are you planning on doing for the 100th anniversary?
Well, we have a lot of things planned. My goodness, lots of exciting things. So in addition to some of our regular offerings that we do, like our Children's Enrichment programs, our Summer Kids Friday, and our ever popular Time Travelers Day Camp, we're also doing some unique things this year. We are going to be doing a lecture series, one a month through the summer, inviting folks to come to the Old Stone House, but we'll also have them hopefully available online for people to attend virtually. We are also opening a couple new exhibits. One is a part of a larger initiative with the Sampler ID initiative of Vermont. So samplers, for our audience, are these historic kind of embroidery works. They're pieces of domestic art, is kind of a way to think about it. So they were mostly created by young girls who were learning. And so not only are they learning to do the stitch work and embroidery work that they would need in that skill set, but they're also, in their embroidery, they're learning the alphabet and they're doing prose and that sort of thing. So there's been a really interesting initiative over the last couple of years to identify a lot of these samplers in collections. So as well as us and 20 other locations, we're part of a driving tour for that. We are also going to be hosting a traveling Smithsonian exhibit. And so this is called Crossroads, Change in Rural America, and we're especially excited about this. This will be coming in August. It'll run into September, and this is in partnership with not only the Smithsonian Institute and the Vermont Humanities and the New Hampshire Humanities, but also with Newport Downtown Development, because I kind of discovered that the exhibit itself was going to be very hard to fit physically into our campus. So we're bringing it right down to downtown Newport. So this will be at the NEK Tasting Center. And we're really excited for the Newport community to be able to see an exhibit about rural main streets right on one of our rural main streets, you know.
Now, what kind of, have you developed any relationship yet with the Amish in the neighborhood? Because I know when the Amish first arrived, the old stone house it seems like such a natural fit because of their lifestyle. You having a history campus, it just seemed like it was meant to be.
Yeah. One of our board members, actually, she has such a wonderful story that she kind of tells about the old stone house and how the Amish have really added to the atmosphere. So she was standing there in our parking lot, which is a grass field, and she could hear this ticking sound, and she wasn't sure what it was, and she was, sitting for a minute, and she realized that it was the ticking of the farming implement being used by our Amish neighbor over in the field, being pulled by a horse. And she thought to herself, it even sounds like the 19th century here at the Old Stone House. So it is very interesting how their presence has added a level of historic reenactment almost, because they are living very much the way that campus has kind of captured in. So it is very nice and kind of complimentary, I think, in that way. And I've met several of them myself personally, but I know several of our board members have very, very strong relationships with the Amish.
Because I know they used to use the schoolhouse for fundraisers. If they had somebody get sick and they needed money, they would have, what was it, fish fry or something.
That precedes me. I don't. They didn't do it last year, so I can't speak to that out of personal experience. But certainly, we would be. We welcome those types of things from our Amish neighbors and our non-Amish neighbors. That we like to make sure that several of our buildings are available for communities to rent and use if they need.
So, what is your philosophy? We talked a little bit about this beforehand. Is a lot of times people are interested. The average person is interested in history that they know, or maybe their parents grew up in, but then it's a little bit more of a struggle to, I know in the last few years, there have been a move to kind of bring in a bit of newer history, and which will then attract more people to the Old Stone House, which will then hopefully make people more interested and aware of the older part of the history.
Yeah. Well, history is made every day, right?
Yeah.
And so it is kind of silly to think that you can just have a cutoff date where it's not history anymore, because wait 50 years, then it will be. You know what I mean?
No, that's it.
So I certainly have a large definition of what constitutes history. I am interested in active collecting, and I think the museum is too. Very often what happens at museums like the Old Stone House, this is certainly not unique to the Old Stone House at all, but when you have an institution that's 100, more than 100, years old, you have seen decades of change in collecting priorities. So when the Old Stone House first opens, the collecting priority at that time is trying to get at that time fairly recent artifacts, because you're talking about early 1900s. They're looking for things from the 1800s, from the 1700s. They want to fill the space and give you a feeling of what it used to look like, and sort of have this captured in time feeling. But like audiences, how long does that carry interest, and is that the most valuable way to really be remembering history? So then you start seeing evolutions in collecting practices, not just being about bring us your old stuff because it looks old and it's about atmosphere, to now we want to collect things that have stories attached to them. And now we can think about collecting stories, not just stuff. And now those stories actually hold more value almost than the stuff. Because a lamp I know nothing about that looks old isn't as interesting as a lamp whose owner I knew, whose family, whose house I know it sat in, who made it, who used it. You know, that's what adds richness, I think, to museums. So in that vein, trying to continue along that of a trajectory and collecting those stories and staying up with the community as well. You know, we are the Old Stone House Museum, but we are also the Orleans County Historical Society. And so part of our mission to bring to life the history of Orleans County, we have to understand that Orleans County's history is going to continue, so we continue.
You know, I got to admit, I love old photos, especially if I know what I'm looking at and where it is and seeing before and after. And especially with Richardson, which you have the Richardson collection there, at least a portion of it. But you know, one thing I've often thought about is with the days of digital photos, so much is being captured, but whether any of it will be preserved in like I've often thought, like, you know, we have some great professional photographers around here, including my friend Rick Durashi. He does amazing photos, but I've often thought, like, where will his landscape and community photos end up after, you know, because they're going to be on a thumb drive or something. I've often thought that you guys ought to have space and have a cloud thing for some of these type of photos, you know, because I find change in landscape or community scapes just totally fascinating. Or we were talking beforehand, just the style of dress.
Yes.
Of, like, I was telling you about Gertrude Essoff, who recently died at 102, and she was a classy lady anyways, but she said sometimes if you're just around and it was such a pain to be at home in just your house clothes, your ordinary clothes. And then in her generation, when in the 40s and 50s, she said she'd have to get her dress on and go out to go do some shopping. And so I love those kind of photos. And so I'm thinking about these modern day photos. They're being taken and probably at more of a rapid pace, but they're not being preserved probably in any one place like your place.
You know, it's such an interesting topic in general. Yeah, the care of kind of born digital content, right? So in the archival world, there are a lot, and this is where I can get really nerdy because this is my jam in collections management. When you have photo technology over the years, you have different time periods and different media that have better stability than others. Right? So going back to really early photography, super stable, shockingly stable in some ways. The most unstable photographs that people have in their homes right now are the color photos they took in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, I believe
those photos are at the largest risk for fading. And not being able to be saved, and also the scrapbook methods of the time. Because I don't know about you, but I know in my home, on my family's bookcase, we had these beautiful photo scrapbooks with the sticky matting and the plastic sheets, and that adhesive is acidic, that plastic degrades. All of those things will cause trouble for your beloved photographs. So everybody with photo albums at home, take a minute and really think about how long you want those to last, because sitting them just on your shelf and ignoring them is not the way for them to live for 100 years. Born digital content has similar challenges. Different file types have longevity that others don't. Things like zip drives, you know, there's ways that media goes obsolete. So if you're not managing your digital files in the same way you would manage or take care of physical files, you might find that you might not be able to open them anymore. Or you might not have a CD-ROM drive
Yeah, CD-ROM.
anymore, and CDs are exceptionally awful.
Right.
There's
Just little
disc rot that causes them to kind of spontaneously go bad. And so if you think CDs are a good way to keep your digital photos, it's also not.
And I had a dog knock over my my portable hard drive, and nobody local could do it. I had so many photos on it. I actually had to send it to a place for several $100s that actually deciphers the black boxes
Yes.
of airplanes. Okay, we only have a couple more minutes for. All right, we only have a couple more minutes for this segment of the show. What more would you like to talk about?
Yeah, well, before we depart, I would be remiss not to mention Old Stone House Day this year. So Old Stone House Day is an annual tradition that goes back even before the museum was opened as a museum. And so this is the one day that we're really wanting to celebrate our centennial. And so we're planning to really make it a really big thing this year, our Old Stone House Day, and we're inviting all of the community to come and join us as well. This is going to be August 17th. We have moved it back to the original weekend of the original Old Stone House Day. So Old Stone House always used to be the same day as the Battle of Bennington Day.
Right.
And of course, that's August 16th, and we always like to keep our day on a Sunday. So August 17th this year, throwing it back to the original weekend. We're bringing it back to sort of that old historical moment, and we're looking for other fun ways to kind of, and there'll be other, surprises from Old Stone House Days years gone by that people can expect to enjoy when they come.
Well, thank you for coming on to the show, and thank you for all your good works.
Yes, and thank you for having me.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.